Welcome to the Monopoly Mindset, the podcast where we uncover the strategies to build your real estate portfolio one property at a time.
We're your hosts, Tyler and Tommy, here to share our story of playing real-life Monopoly.
Whether you're just starting out or a seasoned investor, this is your go-to resource for mastering the real estate game.
So grab your board, roll the dice, and let's buy Boardwalk together. Welcome back to the Monopoly Mindset Podcast, episode number 12. We kind of made a mistake last week. We said that we were done talking about all the properties that we purchased, but we forgot one. So today we're going to get into Tommy's latest property that he bought with his partners, TDJ. So it's a duplex up in the Northeastern PA region again, like pretty much all of his properties. So this is
you sound pretty conceited saying that we forgot about a property. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, I mean, we were all ready to move on to other stuff, but yeah, this is the actual last one. So but yeah, before we do that, we're gonna do our weekly segment of Pass and Go, where we talk about what we did in real estate this past week. So how was your week?
My week is progressing. I'm working on, some of the same things that I've been working on for a while now, but trying to buy a house, and we finally got the zoning completed and everything's going back to the title company. They're waiting on the deed. Once the deed gets completed, they can finish the title work, but I should be getting an update sometime this week, and I should be able to close in the next 2 weeks on the property. So it's been kind of a long process. We'll most likely do a deep dive into that property just in general and like how long it's been to get to this point. But things are progressing. It looks like we should be closing in the next 2 weeks. I signed an extension from the end of March until I think April 15th. So we should be closing within the next 2 weeks, or I'm going to have to sign another extension. And then another property that TDJ is actually looking to sell via seller financing. We got a pretty positive update from the tenant, and hopefully by next week's episode, we will have an update that property sold. It's supposed to be purchased on Monday. So I'm very excited about where that's at. I think those are the two. Go ahead.
That property that you're selling, though, that's like a rent to own, right? So he's going to pay.
Yeah, it's going to be like pretty much like a rent to own. He's the current tenant today. We wanted to sell the property, and we kind of told him, hey, we're thinking about selling. And he said he wanted to buy it. And we decided the best way was really to do a rent to own option. And that's where we're at today, is putting together like the parameters for rent to own.
So he is going to put down a down payment to you guys. Oh, I just got a text from my tenant. Sorry. So he's going to put a down payment down and then pay you guys rent. Does some of that, his monthly payment, go towards principal?
Yeah, so the way that we structured it is he's going to pay us, to your point, the rent, but the rent is basically like an amortized loan. So we charged, I believe, 5% interest rate on this. So his rent is going to jump up a couple $100, and it's going to include paying us interest, kind of like, amortized over a 3-year period. And then at the end of the 3 years, he'll be responsible for getting his own loan to pay off the balance of the loan that he owes us. And that's how we have it set up.
Does he have to pay for any maintenance starting once you sign the agreement?
Yeah, he's responsible for everything. So even in the agreement, I think we have like the HOA fees, like utilities, like everything is going to basically be in his name. So for all intents purposes, he'll be the complete owner of the property, and he's responsible for pretty much everything. And I mean, minus insurance, I think we're keeping the insurance piece of it, so it's just kind of escrowed into his payment, but he'll be paying a little bit more to make sure he's covering all of those expenses. And if anything does come up, yeah, he's the owner of the property. He's now responsible. He can do whatever he wants necessarily to the property. if he wants to pay for upgraded painting or add a deck or whatever he might want to do, it's all up to him.
Yeah, so just so people, if you've never really heard of this rent to own thing from the seller's perspective, me and you typically want to hold on to properties forever, but we know a couple people that really love this rent to own option because one, you get a down payment now. You're not getting your entire, purchase price now, but you're getting a down payment, which is like getting paid once. And then when you run the numbers on a property and you set aside, 10% for like maintenance, you don't have to set that aside anymore since the tenant or the buyer is going to pay for all of that. So you're going to make a little bit more per month in cash flow. And then you get paid again in 3 years when, he actually goes to a bank and gets a loan and pays you the rest of your money. So I think it could be a really powerful thing if you're looking to sell.
Yeah, and again, you're in real estate as a relationship business, at least we are, and we find being in it as a relationship business, you can do things to help people out at times. And instead of kicking this gentleman out and saying, hey, we're going to sell it and maybe helping a different family out, it's like this guy's already living here. He loves the house. He likes the community. He wants to stay there. How can we make this work? And we probably could have sold it to him directly, but when we brought up that we were offering seller financing, he kind of jumped at it, and we thought it was a really good opportunity to kind of keep that relationship going, help him out in a way because our financing terms are better than what is going to be on the open market, and we still make a couple extra, like we're going to your point, get paid like 2 different times, which is kind of unique instead of just getting hit with capital gains like all in 1 year. When you sell a property, it's like, all right, we're going to get hit with a little bit up front today. We're going to pay interest, over the next 3 years. We'll have to, report that as income as well. And then we're going to get another chunk of whatever's left. So we're kind of going to get paid twice. And that's a pretty cool way to make the most out of a situation, I think. Because if we sold it today, you're only paid once. Yeah.
More taxes you got to pay unless you do a 1031 exchange. And over the next 3 years, you can still write off depreciation since you technically still own the property. And then if for whatever reason, obviously this is like worst case scenario, but like if he stops paying you, or he doesn't want to buy the property anymore, he could technically break his contract and just leave, and you get to keep the down payment, which was I think like $20,000. So
yeah, that's something that we've discussed in other episodes too. It's not something you want, right? Like I feel like, in my opinion, that's almost stealing. You get that money up front. Obviously, it's a part of the contract. To your point, if he can't fulfill his end of the bargain and buy it out at the end, then there's there's the risk that he runs that we just keep that money, and then he does have to get evicted or he does leave, and that does happen sometimes. I would feel bad because again, I'm in the relationship business and I want what's best for everybody, and I don't think that's the best solution for him. But if for whatever reason he's ready to move and he doesn't want to purchase the property, then yeah, that is something that would happen. He would lose out on that original payment. And one other thing I wanted to touch on, he'll also not need a property manager anymore. So everything that we've been paying, like the 10% to a property manager, we won't necessarily have to pay anymore because he's the owner. He should figure out all issues with the property and everything kind of on his own. I mean, there might be some communication between us at certain times, but overall, it's not going to be worth paying a property manager for. So we'll save an extra 10% on that deal as well.
yeah, I mean, he might reach out and say like, because you have all the contacts already, like, hey, there's a problem with my HVAC, like who's your HVAC guy and things like that. And that's just, again, like you benefit from referring people anyway. But yeah, and then the other thing, well, and with the down payment, like you mentioned, it's like stealing, but it's also like security for the seller, because with seller or with rent to own, you're locking in a price today, but you're not actually closing for like, let's say 3 years, where that property might be worth $20,000 more in 3 years. So like,
Yeah.
because of appreciation. So like you're not losing money, but if you just sold in 3 years, you would get a higher purchase price generally than you are today. And so I don't know, that's kind of why they make the down payment. It also shows that they're serious, and that, if they have that down payment, there's a good chance that they're going to be able to get a loan from a bank. I don't know about in this situation, but I think a lot of times the rent to own option is used when a tenant, let's say they can't get a loan today for whatever reason. Maybe they have like a bad mark on their credit. Their credit's like 600, and they're like, "Hey, I've been working on my credit, and like I'm pretty confident that in 3 to 5 years my credit is going to be up to 650 or whatever, and I'll be able to get a loan then." That's typically when somebody would want to do the rent to own, because they can't go get a loan from the bank, but they know that they can start paying you principal today, and in 3 years, when they fix their credit or their income goes up or whatever, then they're going to be able to get that loan and kind of like refinance.
And on top of it, like I know you've kind of touched on like some, I don't want to say like more extreme negatives, but I look at rent to own as such a positive way to go about with the real estate process. Like again, it's relationship based. You kind of eliminate going to the banks, which can be a daunting process. And I know if you're buying as a single family person, you might be able to do 3, 5, 10% down. But typically in these rent to own scenarios, you're not putting a ton of money down, right? It's like 5 to 10 grand. So maybe you get a $300,000 house and it's almost 2% down, because the person that's doing, like the owner that's selling the property or doing the rent to own, from their perspective, they're usually not getting a ton of money when they go that route. So at least it like allows people to buy a house without maybe going through that like daunting process of the bank. And I think a lot more people, if they're renting, should be asking about rent to own, because a lot of people right now, there's a lot of houses that are getting listed on the market and people wanting top dollar. It's a really good way, to your point, to buy a house for top dollar. Like, and we kind of did this when we bought our property together. We bought it at a little bit of a higher price, but we got a really good deal. We put a little bit less money down. And in 3 years, we anticipate rates dropping a little bit, the property being worth a little bit more. We're doing some upgrades to the property, and then we'll be able to pull out that equity, pay off the original loan. And I think it's a good way for a lot of people to get started in real estate that are renting today.
Yeah, and typically you're probably going to get a lower interest rate than if you were to go to a bank with rent to own. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's awesome. I hope everything goes well. And next episode, we'll give an update on probably both of those properties.
I really, really hope that this closes for next episode. I cannot wait to finally have this. It's been going on for a long time. I won't put too much out there, but the gentleman just had some issues, some banking issues, and it's kind of delayed this for almost 3 to 4 months. And Ty's beating me up. He's like, "Hey, did that guy buy that house yet? What's going on?" And I'm like, I have faith that it's going to work out. So it'll be very nice once it works out, and I have all the faith that it will. But yeah, I'm just excited.
Yeah, you have a little more faith than me in general, and when it comes to
You,
your
my
tenant.
property manager, a lot of people have been asking me about it. So, like I said, I do have a lot more faith. I trust people a lot more than most do, and I think this is going to work out. So I'm excited. Prove everybody wrong.
Excuse me. Yeah. So I've been this last week. I've been still doing stuff for my property in the Poconos. I got the hot tub moved a couple weeks ago, but the electrician came out finally and hooked up the electrical from like underneath the house to the hot tub.
Yeah.
And so what that required is, like I mentioned last episode, like all the regulations. So he basically had to run electrical line underground from, the hot tub to the basement where the panel is. And he had to dig a trench. It has to be 6 inches or deeper under the ground. And then he has to leave the trench open with like the conduit exposed, get an inspector out. They go, "Yep, it's 6 inches." Then he can put the dirt back on. So everything that he did, passed inspection, but I guess part of code, if you have a hot tub up there, is you need to have an outdoor GFCI outlet that's 110 volts. That's basically unrelated to the hot tub, but like, the outdoor ones with like the little cover, if it rains, it doesn't get wet.
Yeah.
if you have a hot tub, you have to have one of those on the outside of your house. And I guess I was told it's for like, well, what if you want to clean the hot tub or have a pump and you want to run electrical from outside? You have to have a waterproof outlet. So, and then the electrician that did it, he basically was like, I don't have time to do that anymore. Like, because they're a deck building company, and now that it's getting into summer, they're super busy. So I reached out to a different electrician that I also have contact with, and he's gonna go do it. Then we just have to send a picture to the inspector. But the day after the inspector came out, I had a tenant in there for 3 nights, and a few of their outlets weren't working. And me and you were together at dinner, and I was like, "Yeah, I've had no problems with this property so far. Like, everything's been
always
going
got to
great."
knock on wood. Yeah.
Yeah, and literally 10 minutes later, I get this message that like some of the outlets weren't working, and I was like, all right. And I called the hot tub guy, and he was like, well, I didn't touch any other outlets. And I was like, yeah, I mean, that makes sense because he like used, you know, their own fuses and breakers. But basically, this other electrician just said that some wires came loose and that it wasn't ever hooked up properly to begin with. I don't really know, but my biggest fear is that like the tenant wasn't very happy and leaves like a bad review or something. But we'll see. I haven't gotten a bad review yet, so I'm hoping that it wasn't a big deal. And then yesterday, I mentioned that I need to get AC. I got one quote already. And then yesterday I called like 4 companies, and I'm getting a quote today, a quote tomorrow, and a quote next week. So total, I'll get 4 quotes, which is a lot, but the mini splits are also a lot. So I definitely want to do my due diligence and see what everybody else comes back with. Not that you always want to go with the cheapest possible option, but just gonna see what the market says. It should be.
It's
Cost.
weird though. Like I know people always say you get what you pay for, and I definitely understand that. But sometimes I find that people charge a lot of money just because they don't want to do a job, and it's like you're almost
Yeah, or
paying
they're
to.
really busy.
Yeah, they're like really busy, and yeah, maybe they do good work, or maybe they just do mediocre work, but they're very good at marketing, so they're very
Yeah,
busy, and it's like, all right, I was gonna pay more for this guy, and it doesn't even sound like he knows what he's talking about, and you go with the cheaper option, and sometimes you can still get really good work done with the cheaper option. So
yeah.
I don't
It's
think that
actually
you're. Go ahead.
no. I mean, to your point, like, so I got one quote from somebody that my contractor that did the rest of the work on the house. But like he would just like subcontract it out, or he just knows an HVAC guy. But then when I was looking for the rest, I basically used Google, which I mentioned is kind of hard, but this property is 3 hours away and I don't have a ton of contacts up there. So I reached out to 2 companies that had like 1,000 plus reviews, and they're much like bigger companies. So they're almost, like more corporate. And to your point, they're probably super busy. They have 1,000 reviews, like great reviews, but I feel like the bigger they are, at least there may be like a 30, 40 person company. But then I was also like, well, let me reach out to like some of these guys where the company's name is just the guy's name that has like
Yeah,
40, 50 reviews. He's by himself. Maybe he doesn't have as much work, and maybe his quote will, you know, be a little cheaper. And plus, like if you want a long-term relationship, I'd rather have it with one guy that has, one employee versus like this large company that has 50 employees.
yeah, we were just talking to like the office secretary that might not be there for, more than a couple of months and probably rotates through it like a bigger company where you can have a more personalized relationship with a smaller company.
Yeah. Um, and I also got my my violation for building a new deck from the HOA without a permit. I got that removed because I'm not building a new deck. So I finally got somebody on the phone, and he was like, "Yeah, I looked at the county records, and there's like a floor plan of the house from like the 70s, and the deck used to go all the way around the house. So it's an octagon. The deck went
Yeah.
on 4 sides, at least on this floor plan, which would have been like awesome. But now it's just different." And he was like, "Well, and then I also looked at your pictures posted online, and it doesn't look like the floor plan, so I figured you did something. And I was like, I bought it this way. Like I don't. And then so I basically was like, go on Realtor and Zillow, and the pictures are still there from when I bought it, and you can match it up that I didn't do anything to the deck. And he was like, okay, yeah, that sounds good. Like I'll take it off. I just saw that it looked different from the tax records, and I was like, I don't know, wouldn't you have like reached out prior, other than just looking at this floor plan from 1972? Like, but
That is very bizarre. I guess maybe it just gets into a stack, right? Like, hey, this property was recently purchased. Let's just take a look at the most recent records we have. And then he saw that something was different. I don't know. That process seems very weird.
yeah, I mean, like, are they doing that for every single house in their HOA? Like, I would have
Maybe that
thought,
sold recently, but I mean, you bought it like several months ago, so he's that backed up. Maybe it's because he's looking at records from 1972.
yeah. I mean, I would have thought that it would require like a complaint or somebody like reaching out, some neighbor that's grumpy and is like, hey, my neighbor's building a deck. Did they have a permit? But,
Yeah, that's what I would have assumed, not just that this guy is sitting going through records like that.
but, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Now I
Cool.
just need to get the hot tub filled up with water. But other than that, bookings have been doing pretty good, a lot better than I expected so far. This early on, April's booked out every weekend, and then we already have like 10 days booked out in May, which is cool.
It's insane. I'm very happy that it's working out well. You two are definitely making me want to try to figure out how to get an Airbnb somewhere.
Yeah, and we just blocked off like 3 nights to go up in May ourselves, so we're pretty excited.
And Chris and I are excited to go up for the July 4th weekend.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's nobody's going up then. That's getting rented. It's probably the most expensive weekend of the year, so.
When we were at dinner, that was just a joke that Chris and I made towards Ty. We were picking a weekend that we could go up for free, and we thought the July 4th weekend would be the best one, mainly because it's the most expensive weekend of the year.
Yeah, not happening. But
But all right, think that kind of covers this week at Passing Go. So let's kind of get into the episode that we're talking about today. TDJ bought another property. For anybody that doesn't know what TDJ is, it's a company that I'm a part of. I am a 33% partner. It's my good friend Dan Kiley and his dad, Jeff Kiley. Those are my other two partners. And as far as what we typically invest in rental properties up in the Dallas, Pennsylvania area. We rent out to Misericordia students. That's kind of been our model that we've been doing and sticking to. And that's kind of just like a little bit of a background of who TDJ is and what we do.
yeah, so this property kind of started out from the property that me and you bought together that we've talked about on pretty much every episode with the seller financing. But while you were looking at that, you basically saw this other property that you were using as like a comp almost for leverage for the property that we bought together. Like, hey, this is what I'm offering you. And look, there's this other property on the market. So, like, this is what I'm comparing your house to. I think they were both like 6 bedrooms, 2 bath. But this one that you purchased with TDJ was a duplex. But you basically were using it as a comp. And then I guess you had this great idea that you're like, wait, actually, that might actually work out for a purchase. So, how did
Well,
that
yeah,
come?
it was, again, everybody always talks about getting luck in anything. And like, then it's always, well, opportunity meets luck, right? And so because we were running the numbers on the property that we bought together, I would kept running the numbers on that and checking it out and saying, I think this could really work. I think this is a pretty good deal. And then we've discussed that the seller of that property wasn't immediately ready. But for me, I'm like, I really want to buy this property. So if it does become available, I've ran the numbers and I know that it's going to be a good deal. Ironically, I do scour the market very often for that area. And this property came up as a duplex already rented to college students, and it met like all the criteria that I was typically looking for. and was borderline identical to the house that Ty and I bought together. So I'm like, I've already ran the numbers. This is going to make absolute sense. It was actually at the beach. This property came up it got listed, I think, on a Thursday. I talked to my realtor on Friday. I think he went and saw it Saturday for me because he's like, I think this is going to sell quick. And I'm like, I need you to go check it out because I've already ran the numbers. I think that this is a good deal. Like, I know it just came up, but like, I think I got to buy it. At this time, TDJ just got done doing their refinances, which we've discussed took us almost like a year and a half to 2 years to like get our equity out. So we finally did some refinances. We got our equity, and we're like, well, we have the money to buy a house. So maybe like we were just starting to look, and this kind of fell right into our lap. So Saturday, I'm at the beach. My realtor, we FaceTimed. I saw the property. He kind of told me everything was fine. He did tell me that there was another offer already in on the property, which, then you're kind of like, okay, we got to speed up our process. We got to make sure that we can get an offer in like ASAP. And because it like met all of our criteria, I said, all right, let's try to get an offer together. So I remember trying to call Dan to see if he was 100% on board or not. And Dan was away. I don't remember what he was doing, but like we could not access Dan. So then I'm calling Jeff, and I'm like, Jeff, I think we should get this house. And then Jeff and I are kind of debating, discussing it. And he's like, all right, let's talk about it like in a week or like, later on next week. And I'm like, we got to put this offer in like today. Like if we're going to get this, we got to put an offer in today because they already have an offer and they're looking to make a decision by Sunday. So it's just, I know it's really quick, but it meets all the criteria. I've ran all the numbers. I think it's going to be a really good property. I'm then texting, Jeff eventually agreed, and we decided we were going to put an offer in on the property. I think Jeff gave a limit, though, of like what he wanted to go up to. The property was listed, I got to pull it up here. Property was listed for $229. I was running the comps for the house that Ty and I bought at like $250. So I'm like, this property will work all the way up to $250. So I told Jeff that I wanted to do an escalation clause up to $250. Jeff wanted to do it to $245. So I'm then texting our loan guy. Shout out to Dom. Shout out to Dom Pizzi. He was the loan guy for our DSCR loans that we typically, buy houses with right now because the banking process would not have been able to get me an offer letter as quickly as Dom did. I think Dom was actually out and he's working on his phone, traveling through the airport to make sure he could get me this offer letter on time. So shout out to Dom for working hard. I appreciate you. He got me an offer letter for $245 or up to $245. So we basically have talked about escalation clauses in the past. I think we offered like $230 or $235 with an escalation clause up to $245. Luckily for us, the people that also had an offer in had an escalation clause up to $242. So we ended up getting this property. We ended up offering technically $243 on this property. Another caveat was that our realtor told us that the other bid already waived inspections. So I'm now at the beach in Florida. None of us have really walked through this property other than my realtor. And he told us that the property looked like it was in pretty good condition. There really wasn't too much work to do. It was one of the nicer houses that we would have in our portfolio. He pretty much said that it's something that he thinks we should buy, and he didn't see anything structurally like terribly wrong that would cause us to need to get inspections. So we went kind of with his. Go ahead.
I'm kind of going back a little bit, but when you were talking about the pre-approval process, one thing that I just wanted to note is that you got a pre-approval offer for $245, and I've worked with a few different lenders, and some of them do it different. But like, let's say you're approved for $400. I've worked with lenders that are like, hey, every time you want to make an offer, reach out, let me know your offer price, and I'll give you a pre-approval letter for that exact number. Versus other ones will just give you like your maximum pre-approval and use that for all the offers. But from the seller's perspective, if they get your pre-approval letter and you offered $250 and you're pre-approved for $250, they kind of are like, okay, this person's not gonna they can't go up anymore because they're not approved for anymore. Whereas if your lender gives you your pre-approval for 400 and you offer 250, the seller's like, well, wait a minute, this person's approved for way more than 250. Like, I'm not going to go, maybe I want 270 out of them now. So just like a little piece of advice, like I guess it's a negotiating tactic that you can use. But anyway, so you were talking about inspection and I think some mold issues.
Yeah, so and then just to touch on what you mentioned, I think it's different too if you're buying a single family home. I think that fits a lot better. I guess like banks typically from the commercial lending perspective, I've typically seen them give you what you want for the property, not necessarily like a pre-approval, like in the sense that if I was going to buy a house residentially, they would give me, let's say a pre-approval for $400,000. Okay, that's your max, but you can go offer on $200,000 house and like you're 300 and like you could get into that discrepancy. Anytime I've purchased commercial properties, they've typically said, okay, what do you want to buy it for? Okay, 250. Here's your pre-approval for 250. They haven't, and like especially with the DSCR loan, they're using like numbers off projected rents to make sure that they can get you that amount. But I've seen them be a little bit more granular with the way that they look at the numbers. But to get back into kind of the overall opportunity, yes, we did waive our inspections so that we could, kind of match the original offer. And it seemed like when we were getting in there, we were kind of late. Like the people, I think it got listed on like Wednesday, and the people saw it right away and already put an offer in and were like, basically, they were planning on accepting their offer Sunday. They weren't even anticipating getting any bids. That was the way that it was portrayed to us. So we had to get our bid in quick. We had to, put the escalation clause up to 245 and hope that it went underneath that, which again, it was listed for 230. So that's almost what, $14,000 more than what it was listed for that we ended up buying that property for.
It's interesting that if they were planning on going with this other offer, that they changed their mind over $500. Like it doesn't seem like a ton of money, but
well, I think that the other property, again, we don't know what their offer was originally. They might have only offered 235, right? But then the escalation brought it up. So they maybe got like, or maybe it was full offer. Maybe it was like, hey, 230 and we'll waive inspections. And so also just for like, and it sounded like they wanted to get rid of it quickly. So this property as well, one thing that was a little bit sketchy was the basement and like the back of the property. You could tell like it just had a lot of work done to the foundation, which was something that I was a little bit weirded out about. And we didn't know too much other than they had a ton of foundational work just recently completed. And there was, receipts that showed that things were replaced and repaired and fixed up. So we didn't know the extent or what exactly that meant. All we knew was that it was repaired. So we're like, all right, well, the basement was repaired. So it had issues. I get that they might have priced it a little bit less because of that. But to us, it's like, all right, the repairs were made. So I'm not going to hold it against them anymore. Like, it's not like I can say, hey, fix this basement more. Like, you just paid to get the basement fixed. So that was another thing that I think led to them listing the property a little bit lower. And just talking about like, the 1% rule, I know Ty talked about this earlier, but this property was listed for 220 and it was, it's basically a duplex, 3-bed, 1-bath each side. And it was getting rent for $28.50. So from the 1% rule, it's already covering that, which is just like a generic rule of thumb that you're getting a pretty decent deal on a property. So we knew it was a decent deal, even if we went all the way up to $285,000 to buy the house. Like, oh, well, it's still covering the 1% rule. So we knew we had some wiggle room there. But yeah, we did waive our inspection to match the other offer. And I believe driving back from the beach on Sunday, I got the call that TDJ was approved to buy the property. So we were pretty pumped. It was like a real quick weekend of work. But again, that's where like preparation meets the opportunity. Like we were prepared. We ran the numbers. We knew that if a duplex or 5, 6, 7, 8 bedroom popped up in a certain township that met our criteria, like we had the money, we were ready to move, and it all just kind of worked out perfectly. So you could say it was luck, or you can say we kind of prepared for it.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and share your analysis on the property? So this is like the numbers that you ran before you bought the property to figure out what you could buy it for. And one thing that I always say is like the list price doesn't matter. That's not part of the calculation to figure out what you need to pay for the property. And in a lot of cases, in most cases, you're going to be coming in way under list, right? Because like if you're going to try and flip or burr, typically you're coming in under list, and that's when I say like just make the offer even if it's 50 grand under. List price doesn't matter, but it could also go the other way in that, hey, even 15,000 over list, the numbers still are really good. So you know you want to get it as cheap as possible, but if the numbers work for 15,000 over list, then like again, it doesn't matter what the list price is. All right, so on the left, well, you can walk through it.
You can do it. I know Ty itches to talk about numbers, so I'll let you run through the numbers.
All right. Yeah, so 243 is what you landed on. Again, we don't really look at the land value or the building value. It's kind of irrelevant, unless you're selling or something. But so the $3,000 for mold, again, this was projection.
Yeah, so I didn't touch on that. That was one other thing. So this was a little bit of a unique scenario. The company that we got the loan from, I've never really had them do this before, but they actually wanted to do an inspection of their own of the property. So they came out and did their own inspection of the property, which again, I've never had a lender do that. And they came back and said, hey, we think that there's some mold in the basement. You're going to need to get that remediated. So we are like, all right, yeah, no problem. We have a mold remediation guy helped us out at a couple other properties. We'll give him a call. Anticipated it being roughly like $3,000, and that was going to be like the end of it. So that's where we put the $3,000 up front, was that we knew there was a little bit of mold remediation, but other than that, I mean, the property already had 6 college students in there. So it wasn't like we were going to do a lot to the property. Like they were already living there. They had a lease signed for the rest of the year. Yeah, there was nothing else that we really had to do.
Okay. Yeah, and then closing costs 5,000, pretty standard in the area that you buy in. Rent was already 2850. So for vacancy, I mean, typically you do want to put 2 to 5% away for vacancy, but your experience with college rentals is you typically don't really see a lot of vacancy. Like people move out May 31st and the new lease starts June 1st. But it's still good to have that in there just in case. So you put down 25% on this property. A lot of times we talk about 20%. Is that just what this bank required?
Yeah, it is what this bank required. For whatever reason, I think a lot of DSCR loans that I've been getting were 25% down. And I found it tougher to find DSCR loans specific to student rentals. I'm not sure what the correlation there is, but almost every bank doesn't love student rentals. Every time they hear student rental, they're like, oh, more risk, not going to approve that, must get 25% down. Like, we don't necessarily get the best terms purchasing student rental routes. So I think maybe a traditional DSCR, you might get 80% loan to value, but the second you bring up student rentals, there was only one lender that this broker could get to, and it was the 25% down.
So because you were purchasing a college rental, you actually didn't end up using the bank that gave you the pre-approval letter, right? Because they gave you the pre-approval, but then once you told them that it was a college rental, they said that they don't lend to college rentals.
Not necessarily. So yes and no. The company that I was going through did not work with college rentals, but they had like a partnership or like another bank or lender that they use. They like to do a lot of their loans in-house, but in-house they don't like to lend on college rentals. So one of the companies that they broker to, they do college rentals for DSCR loans. So they were able to kind of go through a broker, which probably maybe gave like some extra fees than were going to be in the loan originally, but it still made sense to just stick through the process with them because we were kind of closing on this house relatively quickly. Like I think the other people had like a 30-day close. There's no inspections. Our financing was like squared away. There's no people moving in and out. The kids are already there. So we just kind of, went relatively quickly through this process.
Okay, so you were going to go with them directly as a bank, but then when they didn't want to lend on it, they kind of acted as a broker, and found a bank for you. And typically, yeah, when you use a broker versus going directly to a bank, they do typically take like 2% fee or like points for, as their brokerage service.
I
But
think they
okay,
cut
so
me a deal, but maybe it was like 1%. So they
yeah.
did the best that they could, and yeah, it ended up working out.
Yeah, and the more you do business with a certain brokerage, the better terms and points you're going to get. So that gave you a down payment of, what's that, $60,000, 8.35. Now, I have a DSCR rate that's like 8.8, so you're still a little better than that. But again, DSCR, there's pros and cons to it, and one of the cons is typically higher rate. So that's not great, but like we've been saying, if you can get a deal to work today in 2024, 2025, what's that going to look like in 3 to 5 years when you're able to refinance into like a 5% rate? And then in
Plus,
30 years,
yeah.
yeah.
No, I'm with you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so yeah, go ahead and scroll down. So 2850 for monthly rent comes out to be 34,000 a year, in rental income on year one. And so, when you plug in the property tax, insurance, maintenance, and capex, scroll down a little bit more. So, as we've mentioned before, maintenance is like things that happen on an annual basis. So, like an appliance, a refrigerator, whatever, a leak, like small things that you're gonna set aside 5% for. And then at the bottom, there's capital expense, and those are more long-term expenses that you still need to set money aside for. But like that would be a roof, a driveway, like big things that you're gonna set 5% aside for, but then you might only actually spend that money once every 5 or 10 years. And then you have property management is 10%. So basically, all said and done, your cash flow comes out to be, where's the monthly cash flow? 602 per month. Um, yeah,
Um,
E51, and then so that's 602 a month or 7,000 a year, and that gives you a cash on cash return of 10.5%. And again, cash on cash is like, it's your ROI, but just on the cash flow. So that does not include the other three benefits of real estate, which are depreciation or tax benefits, loan pay down, and appreciation. And so again, kind of comparing this to like a standard investment in like the S&P 500 or like an ETF, you can expect to get like 8 to 10% a year on those types of investments, where here you're getting 10.5 just on the cash flow. And so once you factor in appreciation and loan pay down, that says that your ROI is only what, 12.58.
yeah.
And a lot of that's probably because you have a super high rate, so you're not getting a ton of loan pay down in year one. But again, it's still better than 8 to 10.
And this is when we purchased the property at 2850 for rent, and we've already signed a new lease for next year where the rent is going to jump up to $3,000 a month, so about $150 increase, taking the kids I think from $475 to $500 a student. And when we do that, now we're going to have a cash on cash return on 12.6%, and the total ROI is going to be almost 15%. And that's just with a $150 increase in rent for the year. There's opportunity. This is a larger house to potentially put a fourth bedroom in one of the two units. So we could potentially make it a 7 bedroom, kind of similar to what me and Ty did for our property, that was able to get 3,500. So there is some opportunity for that. And just to like play around with the numbers to Ty's point, like say if interest rates were better, like let's say we got a 7% or we refinance in a year or two, this just shows how 1.3% difference on interest rates can make a huge difference in your cash on cash return. Would have taken this from a 10% cash on cash to 13%. The ROI would have been 16%. Our cash on cash with the upgraded rent to 3,000 is 15%. And then the total ROI would have been 18% when you include the cash flow and the amortization. So interest rates, go ahead.
Just for fun, to show people what it was like buying rentals in 2018 before I started, what does it look like if you got a 4% rate? Because again, DSCR is still going to be higher. So at the time, they were like...
This might not ever be seen again, Ty.
Yeah, so there your cash on cash is 20%. And so when people say it's hard to find deals today, I mean, that right there shows you why. But it's not impossible, right? You still got almost 11% cash on cash return. And again, these are all projections, so it could be a little more, a little less, depending on like maintenance and capital expenses and things like that, and vacancy, right? You might not actually have any vacancy, so realistically, you might be closer to that 15% even with your high rate. So, and to that point, like this is no special way of buying a property. This isn't through a wholesaler. This isn't a BRRRR. This isn't seller financing. This was just your standard on market 20 to 25% down. The numbers work, and it's going to be a great investment over the long run.
Yeah, it is going to turn out really well. It was a really good property for us. To Ty's point, this is something him and I talk about a lot. It's like I'd much rather buy the house for $250,000 today with an 8% rate than the $300,000 house tomorrow with a 6% rate, because then you're buying the property for more money. And I know a lot of people are waiting for prices of housing to drop, and obviously we're not professionals, but I don't anticipate the prices dropping. Like if interest rates drop, I think the prices of homes are going to go up. That's just natural. So again, it's better, in Ty and I's opinion, to buy a house for $250,000 with an 8% rate than to buy the $300,000 house on a 6% rate 2 years from now.
Yeah, like as everybody's saying that rates are going to drop in the next couple years, me and you are kind of like, well, if we can just buy properties right now when they're high, the properties are going to make a killing, because it's two positives at the same time. As rates go down, you can refinance at that lower rate, but also typically when rates go down, prices go up. So now you have all this equity in the property. So it's literally a win-win. And then you can do a cash out refinance, get a, rate go down, and you have way more equity. So that's kind of our mindset of like why we just, personally, I don't care what the market's doing. I just always focus on trying to buy new properties.
Yeah. And like even the house that we just showed, the Dallas Duplex, we were calling it, if we get that house to refi in like, let's say 2 years or 3 years, and it's a 6% rate or a 5% rate, I mean, the numbers are already showing your cash on cash return was significantly better. Granted, that's keeping it at like the same debt today. The debt is going to go up a little bit, so it'll affect those numbers slightly. But as the cash flow goes up, like, the $3,000 a month today could be $3,500 if we had a 7th bedroom, or just a typical $25 increase per year per kid could get us to, $3,100 to $3,200, like just over time. And if we refi and our mortgage goes from $1,400 to, $1,800, but we pulled out X amount of equity, and then we can roll that into buying another property, which is exactly what TDJ just did. We just did this process 2 years down the road. We had properties, we pulled out the equity. Unfortunately, we took 4 or 5% rates and put them into 8% rates, but we did that so we could buy another property that was getting us this 10% return on our cash on cash return. So now we're getting 10% there, really 12% looking at like the ROI plus the amortization. And yeah, that's how you keep playing real life Monopoly. You kind of leverage that debt to buy more debt or to buy more properties, and eventually let other people pay off those loans, and you'll have enough equity to figure out what to do next with. And whether that's selling it and just putting some in your pocket, selling it to buy more properties, which is kind of the strategy that Ty and I think is the best. And you just keep growing when you want to grow, and eventually you can trim off your properties over time.
Yeah, so it's basically like it's like a long-term burr, like a 2 to 3 year burr. You're not getting all your money back right away, but in 3 years, let's say the property appraises for 300, and like you said, you do a cash out refinance, your loan goes from 180 to 240, and so your cash flow it does go down a little bit, but hopefully with rates dropping at the same time, even though you're now borrowing more, your monthly payment hopefully doesn't go up that much because you're going to go from 8.3 to, I don't know, 6.5. But like you mentioned, the most important thing is you're pulling out a majority of your down payment, which again is if you pull out a majority of your down payment, your ROI goes through the roof, and then you're able to buy more properties with that. So do you guys have, I know you just bought it, but do you have any plans for this property other than just holding on to it forever?
We've talked about potentially adding a bedroom.
Yeah.
It's unique though. Like it's got like space in some areas and not a lot of space in the other areas. And we talked to our property manager, and he had suggestions. And like I'm all about Ty. Like called me out the other day. He's like, Tom's always about value add. And like I am always about value add. Like what can I do to add value to a property? And I've seen it with kitchens. I mean, they add in a tremendous amount of value, and I've seen it with extra bedrooms. But I'm not a fan of just putting a bedroom anywhere to put a bedroom, because I've done it once. It's bit me in the butt. I have not ever rented out this freaking bedroom that I put into a place that I thought would work. It's slightly too small. I still think it could work, but it just, as much as I think it's going to work, it hasn't worked to date. And sometimes I just get a little bit cautious. I'm like, all right, if the room is too small, I don't want to go through the hassle to make it a bedroom, because a kid's not going to want to live there. I find, the college kids today, there's a lot more clothes, a lot more stuff. They need a little bit more space. They need closet space. I don't find college kids today to be like, I find maybe like Ty, when he was in college, he probably just lived out of a duffel bag and had like 3 pairs of underwear and like 3 shirts, and that's really all he had. I think kids today have a little bit more clothes, and so try to be cautious of making sure, like I've changed my mindset of just having a house to be a house and a bedroom to be a bedroom. I want to have more quality houses and quality bedrooms and get better rent, but then also give the kids a better place to live, a place that they're going to want to live the next year and they're going to want to tell their friends about. It makes my job easier finding places to rent out the following year. And that's kind of what we've transitioned to. So to answer Ty's question, we want to add a seventh bedroom there to get better numbers. We're just not 100% sure where we can do it at. We originally purchased the property, and then this is going to kind of take us into a little bit of a silo, but we originally purchased the property because it had a door entrance to the basement. And obviously the numbers made sense already, but we thought we had the potential to get a triplex here. Like, wow, the basement used to be finished. They did some structural repairs to the basement, but we can just refinish the basement and rent that out as like an extra unit. We were thinking maybe like a studio. I'm always going up to Pennsylvania, so I was like, maybe it's a place that we could stay, Sarah and I and the pups. And we had like this dream or idea of trying to finish that basement, and it has outside access, and it seemed to make sense at the time. But then we got into the mold issue. And once
we kind of forgot to talk about that. So
no, yeah, I don't know if we forgot. We just didn't necessarily get there. We just talked about the property and all the positives, and there are a lot of positives in real estate, but
yeah.
Sometimes when you waive inspections, you can find out some negative sides of real estate. So I think that's where what we're gonna get into now.
Yeah, so you had projected 3,000 based on your lender's inspection. So you knew that there was some sort of mold remediation issues, but I'm kind of surprised that the kids were living there already with these mold issues. But so how much did it actually turn out to be, and what happened there?
Yeah, so the mold was in the basement. I don't know, like, obviously you don't want mold in the basement. I'm not sure. Like, I'm assuming that some of the repairs were done from the foundational perspective because there was mold in the basement. Or, like, again, sometimes you get slumlords that just own a house forever and they don't do as much work to it. And the the foundational issues were a little bit unique, and I think this might relay into the mold issues. Basically, seems like they had a basement below the basement. And so the below the basement was starting like was all wood and it kind of started to rot. And so the house was starting to sink a little bit. And they had to dig out a whole bunch of dirt, get to the side of the house, put it up on stilts, re-pour concrete around the whole bottom of the basement, and then get like this half of the basement like refinished. So that's what they did on the left side of the basement. That basically looks brand new and was good to go. But on the right side of the basement, there was where it used to be finished, there was like wood floor there. And there was just really a little bit of mold on one wall. And when we went to have that inspected, the mold remediation company said, "Hey, well, why don't I just rip up a floorboard of this like floating wood floor that they have in the basement?" They ripped that up and they found more mold. And it was like a tough pill to swallow because we thought it was just going to be like, hey, $3,000, like, scrape the mold off, slap a paint, some kills on it, get rid of it, and like that's it. Let's put a dehumidifier there, help with the water that's accumulating in the basement, not have to deal with this issue. Obviously, wasn't that simple once they ripped up the floors and saw that there was more mold growing in like from the floor up. We knew we had like a humidity issue in the basement. And again, tough pill to swallow from somebody that's looking at this house like, oh, we're already getting $3,000 upstairs. Let's go put somebody in the basement for another $1,000 and like really make this a killer deal. Like it's got the space. We could definitely do it. And it took a little bit of debate between the partners and I. Jeff and I actually went up to the property to take a look at it because even though we're hearing what they're saying, we're like, all right, how can we put dehumidifiers in this basement to save it to still be able to rent it out because of how perfect the space would have been. Once we got up there and we looked and we understood the issue and like the mold was never really going to go away. And even if we tried, we were probably always going to have mold issues down there. And not trying to be slumlords, we don't want to deal with mold. We don't want to put students or kids in the situation where they're breathing in mold on a daily basis. So we made the ultimate decision to rip everything out of the basement that wasn't foundational. So all of the flooring that was in the basement, all of like the jacked up wood flooring, wood baseboards, we ripped it all out and we basically just have, and then we completed like the mold remediation process. So they got rid of all the mold that was in the basement. They dried the entire basement out and we got rid of everything but just dirt. So we basically just have a dirt basement now. And to us, again, we lost the potential rental income of finishing that basement, but we never really have to deal with mold. There's nothing for mold to grow on in that basement anymore. It's always going to be relatively damp. We have a dehumidifier down there to help with the dampness, but it's not something where we're going to have to, like everything that we have from a wood perspective is structural. So it's things that we have to keep and things that typically the mold isn't going to grow on. And yeah, that became much more than a $3,000 expense. I was trying to pull up the bill here.
Didn't you get like a crazy quote at I think I remember you telling me like $30,000 or something that you didn't end up doing?
Yeah, so I was very stubborn with this basement because I really wanted to rent it out. If you can't tell, I've brought it up about 5 times now. And because I really wanted to rent it out and make the extra income, I did not want to just do this route of ripping everything out as maybe the cheapest way possible. I wanted to completely fix anything that was resulting in the mold and then get this basement ready so it could be rented out. And so in order to do that, like there were some plumbing leaks that needed to be fixed. There were some, and again, this guy, they're more of a remediation company. So they're giving me their subcontractors that the prices were probably a little bit higher. Like if I went directly to a plumber to get the plumbing issues fixed, it would have been a little bit cheaper. But they said I needed a bunch of plumbing issues fixed. They said they're like, overall, to get the basement to be livable, it was going to be like a $30,000 mold remediation repair, to which that's when I flew up there and said, I don't think that this is what I need. That's not what I can afford. That's not really the route that we're going. Once we flew up there and realized it, I think we dropped the price down to $12,000. And that was to basically just gut and get rid of everything that had mold on it and do the mold remediation. So that's where we pivoted to the cheapest option, but also probably the option that's best, because even with the $30,000 of repairs, we were never going to be guaranteed that mold wouldn't grow or give us issues again in the future.
Yeah, and I mean, you can always come back to it in the future. Like if you guys do a refinance or something and you get an extra chunk of $30,000, you could always, decide to finish it later on and get that extra $1,000 a month. So, it's not the end of the world. You solve the issue at hand now and you still own the property, so you can always decide to do it in the future.
Yeah, and again, like if we did something from in the future, to your point, we could start from scratch. And who knows, maybe technology gets a lot better with preventing water from getting into basements, like a new B-dry system or something comes up, or to your point, we get a decent amount of money and we just say, hey, we do want to add some value to this property. Let's make it a triplex and do what we can to the basement and try to waterproof it the best that we can. And yeah, so there's definitely opportunities. It's, but we're kissing that scenario goodbye for now, and maybe we'll revisit it later. But at the end of the day, it's still generating a ton of cash flow as is. It's still a really good property for us as is. We have there's one other area that we're debating adding the bedroom to is it's kind of like a sunroom. Like you walk into the property and there's a sunroom and then you can go upstairs or downstairs. We're debating like just making like completely putting walls up and insulating that and taking that space and making it a bedroom. So I think that's where we left off last, at potentially putting a seventh bedroom there. But for now, that's kind of our mindset, is let's stick to upstairs. Any repairs we will do are upstairs, and yeah, fix the basement, got rid of the mold, and did it in the most efficient, cheapest way possible, but also to repair the issue.
All right, so I think that pretty much closes out all of our properties. And again, the story behind each one. So if you haven't listened to all of them and you're curious, we got a bunch of different methods of buying real estate so far. Seller financing, short-term rental, BRRRR, just straight up 20% down on market. Yeah, go back and listen to those previous episodes. And I think we have a couple ideas for the next episode. We want to do like an episode on just analyzing properties. So kind of what we showed with the Excel, but like going on Zillow, looking at, market rents and things like that. We want to do rent versus buy, real estate versus 401k, just topics that we do a much deeper dive into. Maybe one just on house hacking or 203k, or just some things that we, kind of mention, but don't really explain in depth.
And
so
also, we're looking for guests. We have a good idea of guests that we want on the podcast, and so we're going to try to stick to our criteria, and we have, again, a good list of guests. But if you know anybody that's invested in real estate or thinks about real estate, or you think would be a good person for us to reach out to or to have on the podcast, we would love any suggestions that you could provide to help us find some guests, because that is another part of what we're going to get into, is interviewing guests and understanding their stories, kind of doing a deep dive into some of their properties and how they first got started in real estate, what was their mindset shift. And so if you have anybody in mind, like when you hear, Tommy and Ty, you probably think of real estate. If you have other people that you also think about real estate with, please let us know, because we'd like to have them on the podcast and start sharing their story.
yeah, even if they have one rental, that's kind of our criteria. We probably won't have on just homeowners unless they're doing like a house hack, but anybody that has like a investment real estate property, we want to interview and just pick their brain, get their story, and hopefully help other people figure out how to buy their first rental.
And our criteria was trying to find people with like 1 to 2 rental properties, because we want to stick with the smaller investor. And that's what we think the biggest step is, right? Like 90% of people just don't get started in real estate. So we're trying to show like that 10%, like why do you need to get into real estate, and kind of show those steps, hurdles that people have just made to get into real estate and like how they got their first deal, because that's what we think is the most important thing for everybody to do is just get that first deal. But as Ty and I are looking through our Rolodex of contacts and people, we're like, it's tough to find somebody that's just got one. Usually they get one and they get two, or then they get three, and now they're growing. It's like, all right, we got to try and find these people that are right at getting their first property or their second property and really getting, into the beginning stages of the game. And that's when it's the freshest, right? They just made that shift, and that's really what we want to mindset shift. There you go. That's a tongue twister. But that's who we're targeting. We want people that are just getting their first rentals and want to explain their story, their mindset, and what got them into real estate. So hopefully that can encourage the more people to start investing in real estate as an alternative.
Yeah. All right. It's a good episode. And we'll see you next week.
Peace.